All right, Kelpie, thank you so much for being here. This is an absolute pleasure. We've never met in person, folks.
Oh,
We've never met in person, so this is like my introduction to all things Kelpie. There's so much I want to talk to you about. Just thank you for being here. Thank you for the work you've done.
hey, likewise. Love your stuff. I've got lots of questions for you too.
Okay, yeah, well, absolutely. That's what the format's for. I but there's other books on soil, and I've done some things, that are unique and stuff, but there's no books like your book. And that's what's so incredible about the Biochar Handbook. It's something that like, when I heard, when I came up with the title Regenerative Soil, I knew someone else was going to do that title eventually. When I saw this, I was like, oh, oh. You pulled that right out of the zeitgeist because if you didn't do it, someone would have called the biochar manual or something like that would have, I mean,
It had to happen.
we all needed it. You
Yeah.
gave us something that we all deeply needed. And I feel like people have like been like, yeah, someone should do something about this for years. And then you did. Do you want to share that story with us? How did that happen? How did this come to be?
Well, golly, it goes back a while. So let's see. In the early 2000s, I had just come off 10, 15 years being an ancient forest protection advocate,
Hmm.
working to protect trees and old growth forests here in the Pacific Northwest and globally. And boy, I was kind of burned out. So I started working as a journalist,
Did
covering
you go up
environment.
in the trees and like camp
Yeah, I
out
did
and
that. I did
okay.
that. Yeah, I
I could
got
see that
arrested.
getting old. Is there more food coming?
Yeah, well, I did it all. I did the chaining myself to logging equipment, getting arrested, being thrown in jail, getting beat up in jail,
Oh
getting
no.
sued. I did all that. And then I ran an organization for about 10, 12 years, the Siskiyou Project, we called it. And then we did all the policy work, the science, looking at biodiversity, making the scientific case for
Yeah.
saving these ecosystems, and doing the lawsuits, raising the funds, getting legislation passed. And actually, Matt, we won in a lot of ways. And as far as federal forests, we stopped logging roadless areas, basically, and most of the old growth forests. So in a lot of ways,
Hmm.
we really did win. So it was time for me to move on to something else. And I always loved gardening, wanted to be a back to the land. I've lived in this rural community in Southwest Oregon since 1990. Have big gardens all the time. The whole hippie homesteader thing has been part of my development. And so, yeah, so coming out of the ancient forest, just tired of being an activist, really. I wanted to just do something positive and build things rather than just fight things. And so, yeah, and and just growing my garden, trying to learn more, and being a journalist. So being a writer, writing about all these issues, energy, a big part of my background, my degrees in mechanical engineering. So I got that, before I started the forest protection work. I was an engineer wanting to do work on renewable energy.
Hmm.
And you know what? I'm going to back way up here, Matt,
Let's do it.
and tell you that, yeah, so I actually lived in Austin, and you're in Austin now.
Hmm.
And so I was there in the early 80s
Okay.
and trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And ended up going to auto mechanics school because I wanted to invent the ecologically high mileage car, and then into engineering, and then moved out west and got my engineering degree and wanted to do renewable energy. And there's nothing happening in the 80s.
Hmm.
Nothing. Ronald Reagan had taken the solar panels down off the White House. So it's very frustrating to have this knowledge and this degree and not being able to really use it, because there was really, all my job offers were for Defense Department stuff, and I wasn't going to do that. So I went and joined Earth First, got arrested, changed my whole life
The
course,
opposite direction.
the opposite direction. and ended up as the hippie homesteader and the forest activist. But yeah, in the early 2000s, I was working also as a journalist, writing, just covering these issues and writing about them because I knew a lot about energy, environment, and all this stuff, climate. And that's when I heard about Terra Preta. So that was in 2006. And there was a little article about these black soils in the Amazon that seem to grow themselves. And I was like,
Hmm.
wow, because I'm just really getting back into gardening big time, and soil and carbon. It just grabbed me. And yeah, and so I tried to find out more about it. And I realized, I wanted to write more about it, but there wasn't that much happening. So it's like, okay, I'm going to have to do it. And then I'll write about it. So that's how the book came about.
That's amazing. Holy cow. Yeah. So the number one thing I wish we could do is terra preta. And the number one thing that we do opposite of terra preta, even when we try to imitate it, because I've tried to imitate it in various ways, is we don't leave it as a deposit in the ground that we don't take from until like it's matured. You know,
Mm,
like the whole land. Like so they did these pit with like these compost parts with the biochar and everything, and then they would make a pit, and then that they would leave it, and then
mm-hmm,
it would be like a seed itself for
mm-hmm,
that future state, for all of the future states of that soil. And it's that repetition of doing that that created that consortium of microbes that had that uniform result. A uniform group of microbes created that uniform predictable result, and that's what regrows it. And so it's like we just need to do that everywhere.
mm-hmm.
We
Yeah.
really need to do it everywhere, and biochar is a critical component. But I think it's going to be like whatever food, whatever your latrine, with biochar. But those ingredients with those microbes are going to be critical.
I think it really depends on where you are in the world. I mean, a tropical rainforest is very different than a temperate rainforest or a temperate prairie. So what I think what biochar just does is it provides the substrate for all this good stuff to happen.
Mhm.
So I don't know that it's a particular consortium of microbes that work, because everything, it's all different. But I think it brings together the community is what it does. Provides a place for everybody to sit down and be happy and work together. And one of the most important things about it is the electrons and the EH
Mhm.
and what it does to EH, which you've done such a good job, Matt, of bringing that information out to the public, because that's a difficult concept. We don't really, most of us even understand pH. And now we got to understand EH. But when you do, and you see how they work together in those phase diagrams, I think that's what biochar does is it buffers pH, but it really buffers EH.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, when I talk about soil organic matter, we got to raise soil organic matter levels, and then we talk about our mineral side. It's like so often the mineral side, it's very difficult to affect because
Mm,
you have this like maybe baseline of like limestone, but like the biochar is a mineral carbon. And
mm-hmm.
and so it's like it augments the hardware side of things.
It
And
does.
and then because of its ability to hold nutrients also and minerals also, it allows us to like put in more memory chips, put it, you know what I mean? Speed it up.
Yeah, yeah. It's little seeds that grow humus.
Hmm.
The way I think of it. It's
Mm.
like little nucleation sites where all these things, it's like soil aggregates. It's its own kind of soil aggregate or
They're like
seed.
islands.
Mm-hmm.
And what I see under the microscope is I see that hyphae for saprophytic fungi will literally chain together like anchors the biochar, and I totally believe it's not. I mean, the food there, the potential for food there, that's one thing, but I think it's more energetic
Yes, I
because
agree.
it's like they're plugging in to this energy field that allows them to do their feeding and all their functions better. I think a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people are thinking always food, always nutrient, but
Mm-hmm.
E. coli, pathogenic E. coli even, as well as mold, they feed on EMF and Wi-Fi. We live in this world with both these paradigms, and no one ever seems to put them together.
EMF feeds on, wait, mold feeds on electromagnetic fields?
Yeah, yeah, it does.
Really?
That's part of the reason why we have all these houses with these explosions of mold. They've got really good Wi-Fi.
Holy cow. Will it
I
make my Wi-Fi better if I have mold?
know. No, but it'll amplify the pathogenicity. Yeah.
Lovely.
And just like microplastics do too. It seems like
Mm.
there's like a moral there or something.
Yeah, yeah, we got to clean it all up.
But
So I have a biochar mystery that's
mm,
related to that. I have a bunch of biochar mysteries.
oh, let's talk
But
about that.
yeah, but this one is so I had a big bag of biochar that I got from Biochar Solutions. They're over
Okay.
in Medford, Oregon. They're one of the bigger um, or Rogue Biochar, they also go by. And they have this 30 megawatt biochar or biomass power plant
Hmm.
that they use ground up wood, and they throw it into this big furnace. They make electricity, and a lot of the carbon comes out in the ash because it's just moving really fast. And this is just typical of these biomass power plants. It's what they do. And so they have bag filters that cyclone filters that drop the carbon, the ash out before it goes in the air up the stack. And then this ash is like 40% carbon. And it's
Hmm.
actually beautiful biochar. So, if you're buying biochar commercially, a lot of it is from this source and it's great stuff. What's really fun about it is that so they filter out the ash. So it's, like 90% pure carbon,
Hmm.
little flakes or grains. It's like rice grain size pieces of biochar, really nice stuff. And they're near me and we work together and they give me biochar to play with. So I had a bag of it sitting in my yard for, I don't know, a year or something. And it's the end of the summer and I went to go and just clean up the rest of it and put it away so it doesn't get wet in the rain. And digging through this bag and it's full of roots. And this is plain mineral biochar, never touched compost, nutrients of any kind, didn't even really have water in it because it's like September, right? It's dry. And this bag, it's one of those mesh bags, it's full of roots. And there's a grove of pine trees nearby, about 20 feet away. I'm like, these are pine roots. The pine tree is sending its roots up into this bag of completely mineral stuff, dry. Why?
Yeah.
Why? It can't really be for water. It's certainly not for nutrients. It's got to be for electrons.
Yeah. I think so much of our soil is totally depleted of energy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, grounding, there's a reason why they're hiring people to do food forests, like and do a permaculture food forest to
Uh-huh.
do grounding, because it's the soil health, the energy in the soil that creates that effect. And
What's
so
the
it's like
grounding?
grounding, earthing, that whole thing where like the earth's negatively charged and the
Uh-huh.
sky's positive. And so if we're just in shoes, we're always positively charged, and that's bad for our health. And the second we put our feet on the ground, our blood pressure drops,
Mm-hmm.
our heart rate becomes more normalized in the beats. Like there's all these like instant health benefits, and there's long-term benefits that they've mapped out. There's this whole earthing movie, but um, the health of the soil is what determines the magnitude of that effect. I mean, if you we all know like we can put our hands in really caustic alkaline soil and literally burn us.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
I had that happen to me all through California because it was like pH 8. And so
Oh,
my hands would
wow.
turn like bright red. And my wife would be
Really?
like, "You have to wear gloves." And then they would start splitting because they would suck the
Oh,
energy out. They're so oxidized that when I touch it, it sucks the energy out of my hand and then cracks the skin because the energy is being lost.
wow, that's wild.
Eh,
So
yeah,
people are
and
making food forests so that their earth is more grounding.
yeah,
I see.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I really feel that biochar is a part of this, but the ability to measure that in situ, I think, is the final frontier for us in this space. Getting that a functional and reliable redox meter. People are working on it like sensing, but redox is the hardest part of that whole thing. And
Mhm.
I think it's protocols. I think we're going to be like, oh, well, if you take it and then do this with it, combine it with water, maybe pulverize it, maybe do this, I don't know, but I feel like there's going to be a way.
I've done a bunch of readings with an orb meter, and I don't really know how to use it or anything.
With
Yeah,
you.
yeah, and different things, especially when I was playing around with EM, and I could really see the differences there. But I didn't really know what to do with the information, but I'm learning.
Well, with EM, I mean that even with field applications of it, you can reduce. I think it's 59 millivolts in only hours. So
Hmm.
it's like massive change can happen just with these microbes. And one of the things that gets left out when we talk about microbes is their byproducts, what they excrete. And so with EM, the first wave is eating sugars that you add molasses, but then they run out of molasses and then they start producing protons.
Hmm.
So they start pumping protons and filling that liquid with protons. And that's what roots are going to be pumping out, most of the time to release nutrients, cation, and get cations. And, they flood the cations off of the humus and off of the clay. And so we are imitating that. And so we're bringing this highly energetic, imitating what a field of exudation would do
Mm.
energetically, and that's like kind of like a something that people don't think about. But
Interesting.
pH is protons, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Well, if it's 3.5 pH,
that's a lot of protons.
yeah, yeah. People, are just putting all this stuff together and testing to see it and understanding those tests is just arriving. I feel like I want to know way more about like how you test biochar, the extremes, the caveats, the limitations of
Mm.
biochar. Like I want to know all that, and I know that we're in such early days with it.
Hmm.
Some people are talking about how it's going to be used in microchips, right? And some people are talking about how this is the thing that's missing from all of our soil. And so there's all these extremes, and I would love to today kind of go through all that with you. But first, before we go any further,
Yeah.
what's your definition for biochar?
Biochar is charcoal that's either A, suitable for use in soil, or B, has carbon sequestration ability. And that's the definition from the International Biochar Initiative. So, just to go back to my history a little bit, so I learned about terra preta. I was fascinated. I was writing for different news outlets and magazines, and I was writing for a yoga magazine, and I said, "Will you please send me to the first international Agrichar, it was Agrichar then, conference in Australia in 2007 to write an article for you?" And they said yes. So they paid my way to Australia to be at this very
Whoa.
first biochar conference when it was still called Terra Preta and Agrichar. That's where they came up with the term biochar. A year later, I contacted them. I met the people at the IBI that was just forming, International Biochar Initiative, and I said, "I want to work for you. We met at the conference. I'm a writer. I can do all this stuff," and they hired me. So I worked for IBI for 4 years at the very beginning of all the biochar industry. And I met all the soil scientists that were working on it and all the engineers who were engineering pyrolysis plants and all of this. And I was assigned to manage the process of creating the first biochar standards. So
Mm,
the characterization and testing standards. So that took about a year, and I went through it all in great detail with all the stakeholders. So I learned a ton. And that biochar definition was really tough to come up with because charcoal is a huge range of materials.
mhm.
I mean, it's not one thing at all. And so when people talk about biochar quality, you always have to say, well, what are you using it for? But they came up with that definition because really the whole idea came from soil science. That was a moving force behind it. But a lot of climate people were very interested in the carbon sequestration potential of it as well. So it was these two kind of, groups, the climate people and the soil people. And so that was the definition that they came up with. So basically, charcoal with the caveat suitable for use in soil or usable as a carbon sequestration pathway.
So I would say for me, the only way those things happen is with life and like carbon being there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
More liable carbon, right, being there. So like compost or life that and even when you're doing EM, there's carbon in there.
Oh
There's
yeah.
forms of carbon in there.
Oh yeah.
So I always say that bio is the life and the char that we combine. And
And a lot
so,
of people use that definition now that biochar is charcoal that's charged with life, so it's living. Because
mhm,
biochar, when you first make it, it's just mineral. It doesn't have any
right.
life on it. And it came from life, but you killed the life when you heated it up. So you have to put the life back in it. So and then there's a kind of third um, part of biochar, which is all those material uses you were talking about, like for electrodes and high tech and construction, cement, concrete, and those are all really only considered biochar because of the carbon sequestration potential, which means that it has the char. You can make that kind of carbon from coal.
Yeah.
You can make it from rubber or plastic or something, or fossil sources. So it has to come from living biomass. But
Hmm.
it is too much of a confusing definition, and I think it's kind of set biochar back in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. At least biochar that's used for soil life.
Do you know
And
that TED talk with that guy? I think he has got a beard and glasses, and he's like, as soon as it turns into char, it's biochar. Like he's like got a very strict definition, and if it's char, it's biochar to him. And he never brought up compost, never brought up like microbes.
yeah,
The entire TED talk, and I have all these people sending me. They'd be like, "But you said your definition's like this, Matt," and I'm like,
well,
"This
I
guy."
think the idea of saying biochar is charged charcoal ready for
Mm,
soil,
mhm.
I think that's fine. But the
Okay.
official definition is from the IBI, has all, so that's the source of a lot of confusion for people. And in a way, the original term for terra preta was going to be agrochar. And I
Mhm.
kind of like that.
Yeah.
But whatever, it's also doesn't even have to be used in agriculture. It can be used in forests. I'm a big
Yeah.
proponent of that. So let's just stick with the definition of biochar is charcoal that's suitable for use in soil, and you have
Yeah.
to charge it
Yeah.
to make it really useful in soil. Although if you just throw it in soil, it'll charge itself over time.
It's true, but I feel like those original studies in the Netherlands where they went to those forests and they added the char and the char like robbed the humus from the local air, like the soil environment around it.
Oh, I remember
Like
those.
it
Yeah.
destroys soil humus.
That no.
They're like,
What it did is, so
but
this is a
remember that time period? Everyone's
I
like, I
do.
heard
I
biochar's dangerous.
I was working for IBI at the time, and that was my job, was to push back on all those things, or to investigate them.
Yeah.
And so with that one, that was called priming. And what that means is you add something to soil and it makes the microbes go wee. And then they start getting really active and they end up depleting soil carbon because you stimulated them. And it's a temporary thing. And in those forest studies, that was Wardle was the guy's name. They put little bags of biochar in the litter layer in the forest soil, and yeah, the microbes went, oh boy, and they got active, and they did their respiration and respired a lot of CO2 and depleted the soil carbon layer. They didn't
So they
destroy the
did that in
soil.
pockets. So they added super energy rich
Yeah,
sections and pockets.
yeah,
That's a
yeah.
good way to drain it.
And actually, the effect, when we had our scientists look at it at the IBI, they said, well, a lot of this is just because of the pH change. You added some ash because biochar is high pH. There's always a little ash in it, and that's what stimulated the microbes in this highly acidic soil. And that's what happened. Now there have been recent studies, long-term field trials in Australia and in the U.S. and Iowa, where they have put applied biochar in agricultural soil in a proper way. And over 10 years, they've seen the soil carbon levels increase beyond what the biochar they put in there. So it's not, yes, it can do priming in certain cases temporarily, but in the long term, it stimulates the soil microbial life. So you get more root exudates, you get more root biomass, you get more humus formation, and you increase soil carbon long term beyond the carbon that you added as biochar. And they call that now negative priming. So,
I love that. So
mhm.
there's a lot of numbers people throw around, and people say that it's like, and these are all of our friends. So I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus, but I'm
Well,
just,
yes, you need to be critical of these things. You can't just go, oh, yeah, biochar. You need to look at it, and it doesn't always work in all cases.
well, but for me, it has to be a range, right? And even if we're doing averages, that implies a range. And so I always really want to understand the normative range of expression. And so like three times like it's mass in water. It can hold three times its mass in water. I heard it can hold seven times its weight in water. And then heard that it's like a three time or it's like a -3 carbon sink or something like that. And you know what I mean? You know who said that? But but in for me, I'm like, in what situation, in what, range, all these things make such a difference. And
Yeah.
so my student who's in Florida, my student who's in Alberta, my student who's, in Kuwait, they're all going to have such different reactions and ranges. And that's part of why I'm creating the database. But what are you seeing on your end?
Well, I mean, those numbers are fairly meaningless because okay, first of all, your biochar is going to be different depending on what you made it from. The density of your material, is it oak? Is it pine? Is it straw? Totally different characteristics. Then when you add it, the biochar itself holding water or not, it depends on the particle size. And then it depends on how the soil that you mix it with. That's what you care about. How does it hold water in the soil that you mix it with? And so those numbers are really meaningless to me. Um, so what I want to know is it going to hold water in the soil? Is it going to be available to the plants? And so to do that test, I'm a big believer in bioassays.
Hmm.
That's what matters. So you take your soil and you take your biochar and you put them together and you grow some plants in that and other mixes, and you grow your plant, grow a tomato plant till it's 2 feet high, and then quit watering all the pots. See which one dies first.
Ha!
That'll tell you what your water holding capacity is of that biochar and that soil combination.
And that's
Oh,
functional.
yeah, it's a lot of it is about aggregates and particle sizes, and the way in the hydraulic conductivity of the soil, how fast it drains.
Have you thought
Um,
about getting the Rainmaker testing soil tester that Ray Archuleta uses?
no, I haven't because so I'm not working as a crop advisor for people right now.
Yeah.
And so I do all my work is in my garden, and I have in the past worked a lot of what I learned really came from a NRCS Conservation Innovation Grant that we got in 2015 that let me work with a group of enthusiasts and about 10 small farms. And so we
Mm.
did do some field trials and so forth. And I learned so much. I mean, I got to praise that program from NRCS because it lets people do citizen science,
That's amazing.
like you do, right? And
Yes.
this is the real science. This
Yeah.
is what really matters. And farmers are scientists, and to be able to support them to do that, it was just life altering for me to be able to do that with a small, like $75,000 grant over 3 years. Let me do that.
But you're doing real science. That's the thing is so many people are doing meta studies. So many people are
Oh yeah.
doing, you know, hip shots or too small sampling sizes or they're doing all this stuff that is getting the answer they want to get. But
Mm,
this idea is like, well, let's see how the plants do. It's not just honest, it's functional.
yeah.
And that's was the original point of science to
Yeah.
help a life be better and help us perform these things better, in a
Yeah.
variety of ways. For me, it's like how to be more regenerative. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How to get that flywheel of life to pick up. And biochar has always been this part of it that I've known is key. So I do conservation burns. I have never had a kiln. I've never had a tort. I've never had any of those things. And I'm really excited to check out the Ring of Fire.
You've got a kill now.
I've got it now. Got to put it together. I got to get my son's in the middle of like a training camp right now, and my wife and other boy are off with family, greeting a new addition to the family, a new baby.
Mm.
And so I'm just like running around. We have 4 dogs. I'm just like running around trying to make sure everyone's happy, everyone's fed. The gardens, the plants too are the same way. They're like, "Could you pay attention to me?" And I have like a 2-acre garden,
I
so
know
I'm
this
with
time of
you.
year, I know I'm trying to get the garden in, trying to do the last burn, all that. Yeah.
Do you have a date where you stop doing burns in
Well,
the
of
year
course
because
it,
of fire?
yeah. I mean, you lived in California, you know what fire season is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
What are
mean,
your
it,
dates?
it depends on the year.
Yeah, 'cause of the rain.
So I think we've got till the end of the month, and then sometimes they'll extend it into June if we have a lot of rain, but we haven't had that much rain. So
Well, yeah, no, I would always the thing is most people don't realize when you do biochar, you need to call and like ask permission that day. In most places in America, you need to call up the local fire department and go, "Hey, I'm gonna do a burn today," and you tell them what you're gonna do, and then they say that's fine, or they're like, can you not?" And then you go, "Why?" And they're like, "Well, because of this," and you're like, "Oh, that's right, it
yeah,
hasn't rained in a month."
yep,
But
yep.
but and it feels like a little bit like maybe an overreach, because a lot of people, love their freedom.
No, our fire department got called out 20 times last week on burn piles.
Right.
And actually, our fire department loves the Ring of Fire kiln because it's so much safer. And I'll
Yeah.
tell you why, a couple reasons. So it's a big container, 7.5 foot in diameter, big ring with a heat shield around it. So that, makes it a lot easier to work around. And you're going to put about 10 burn piles in this thing, loading it continually. And you're going to make a couple of yards of biochar, a couple of cubic yards of biochar in about 4 or 5 hours of burning, which is that's quick to
Yeah.
process that much material. So the alternative is you've got a pile of slash in your backyard and old boards and stuff, and you want to get rid of it. So you just light it on fire, and you don't know how to really do a burn pile, so it just sits there and smokes.
Ooh.
Smolders, smoky, not well constructed pile. This is what we see all the time, right?
In
And so
California, you sneeze and it goes right
yeah,
all
exactly.
around
So
you.
what happens though is it's going slow, it's smoky, you don't want to be out there. You got something to do in the house. It's like there's nothing happening really. I'm going to go in the house and do the dishes and I'll check on it in half an hour. Wind comes up,
Boom.
ember goes out, dry grass is there. All of a sudden you got a grass fire and you call Ivy Fire and say, help. When they see what we do, they're like, oh wow, these people are right there. They're tending it. They've got a hose in their hand because if they want the biochar, they got to put it out at the end. And because it's in a container and all the air comes from the top, it's closed on the bottom completely. That means there's very hardly any embers or sparks or anything. So the wind comes by and nothing happens because
Wow.
that flame is down in the kiln and it's sucking air from the top. So you don't have shooting flames and you don't have embers and they love it. When we invited our fire department out to see what we're doing, we gave him the address and we're kind of in the back a little ways. And it was like, where's the fire chief? Where is he? And he finally shows up. He says, I was looking for you. I couldn't see the smoke. I couldn't see any smoke because we don't have any smoke. And finally I heard the flames crackling. And that's how I found you. The fire
Wow.
departments love us. I always recommend you inviting them out to see what you're doing.
Do you feel like this is like the reason you're an engineer? Because I'm gonna share my own perspective on it in a second. But do you feel like that's the reason why you were an engineer?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for sure. I had other ideas when I was in engineering about energy, but I feel very fulfilled that I've been able to use my engineering education and background to design this thing that works pretty darn well.
I
Yes.
love it. You know, I did conservation burns in Northern California, and it was always scary. It was
Hmm.
always scary. You make that stack, it goes fast. The thing
Yes.
is, it's like the minute you light it in California, in my area of California, Sonoma County, you immediately realize the consequences of your actions might slip out of your control because it burns so fast, so quick, and you're like, oh, oh, this is how these fires start. These fires start with a spark, and then it's like it's 20 feet in all directions.
Well, man, the conservation burns can be really safe if you do them in the right time of year.
Oh,
That's the
totally. What I'm
key.
saying is that all the stuff I gathered from the surrounding area is such powerful kindling that
Mhm.
this is why, someone on the way to Yosemite lets out a cigarette butt and flicks it out the window, starts a massive fire. Or even crazier, and this happened right outside Yosemite, there was plastic that made a reflection on the grass, garbage,
Mhm.
and that started the
Mm.
fire.
Wow.
So it was so dry, so crazy where I was raising my kids that when we did I went down the whole area 50 feet all the way around. So there was no chance that we are gonna have an ember start a fire. And I've got my
Mhm.
kids there with me too. So I wanted to be safe. My wife is there, the kids are there. We light this thing and the flame gets like 20 feet high because it's burning so fast that it's so dry. And
Mhm.
so it wasn't 2 hours, you know,
That's
but
why it's better to make many small piles if you're doing the conservation burn than one big one. You can
yeah,
control it
but
better.
and the other thing is your heat shield. Most people have
Mm.
no idea what real heat is. And the second you're around a real conservation burn, and I've been around ones that aren't that hot. Here in Texas, they're less hot than California. With even bigger piles. It's burning at a slower rate, so it's less hot.
Yeah.
And so, but that heat shield is the only way I think you can get close enough to do a good job managing it
Hmm.
because it gets so hot, especially in California, that it's very difficult to approach these things and that heat shield is that solution.
It really helps. Yeah.
It's incredible. And it's elegant. The system is
Thank
so
you.
simple. The double-sided and everything. It's I have an Enki stove, which is like a gasifier reburner system, and it's so similar. I mean, obviously theirs is like a little bit more convoluted. They're putting like little air holes so it looks cool and pulls in. But you just left it open on the sides and it's doing the exact thing
Yeah.
full. And so did you study fire for this or like Ernie and Erica Wisner like they're all into this. They're all like mapping fire and everything. And did it just come to you that that's what the airflow?
Well, the concept of the flame cap kiln came from Japan.
Ah,
So early on, when I was involved with biochar, I worked a lot with stoves because, this was what we're waiting for somebody to, people to develop these big pyrolysis plants. Hey, we can do a lot with stoves, especially in developing countries. People are, burning lots of wood, burning smoke, very smoky
yep.
stoves to cook their food, and women and children are getting respiratory disease. So the stoves movement was already looking at these microgasifiers. And those, the TLUTs, top lit updraft gasifiers, and those make biochar very nicely, small amounts, you know.
Yes.
And so I got involved with a lot of the stove things and built a lot of different stoves. There's a bunch of different designs in the Biochar Handbook. You can make out of tin cans if you want to make one. So, started looking at how that all worked. And then I found out about the Japanese cone kiln, which was just a simple little circle open on the bottom. But you set it on the ground. And they had one, the biggest one was like 3 feet in diameter. And it had a slight incline, little cone shaped thing about, I don't know, 20 inches high. And they would put bamboo in it and they just stack it up. It's like a fire ring at a campground, right? And they'd stack it up and it would burn down and then they'd add more and add more. And what happens is it burns down to charcoal. And as soon as it starts to ash, you add another layer and the flames up and the charcoal in the bottom doesn't burn because air can't get to it because you keep adding more and the air all goes to the new stuff in the flame. And so the new flaming stuff actually protects the char you made on the bottom. And you can even take a thermometer, one of those laser thermometers, infrared thermometers, you can see the bottom of it starts cooling off.
Huh.
All the heat's at the top. So it's just a simple bin. And so I made one of those and it took me a while to figure out how it worked because all the literature was in Japanese. All I had were pictures, but I figured it out and I was making char at a little cone kiln my friend made. But the cone was really hard to make for a shade tree welder, because you got to cut it's wastage of all this material. You have to cut a, cone shape out and then bend it and weld it. And he was like, this thing almost killed me. I'm not going to do another one for you. So I said, well, let's make a pyramid shape. Same idea. So I made those for a while, called them the Oregon kiln. We made a lot of them, big ones, like 5 feet in diameter. And that was our main forestry kiln for a long time. 2 feet high, 5 feet on top, 4 feet on the bottom. And it worked pretty nicely. But then the group that I was working with, the Umpqua Biochar education team, they actually invented the Ring of Fire, not me. I invented the heat shield part of it, but they just took roofing steel, corrugated steel, and they cut it to like 40 inches tall pieces, and
Hmm.
they bolted them together and made a ring.
Huh.
So anybody could do this. Go do it right now. Anybody's welcome to make their kind of little ring of fire like that. And it worked really well. And that's when I realized you don't need the slanted sides at all. A circle is actually the best shape because it's has the greatest volumetric efficiency.
Hmm.
So less surface area per volume. So less surface area means less heat radiated out. So you hold more heat in. So the cylinder is the perfect shape for these kilns. And we used those for a while. And then in 2020, when everything shut down, I'm like, oh, what am I going to do? All my workshops are canceled. The kids are home from school. They've got nothing to do. Yeah, that's when I started working on the design for the Ring of Fire kiln with the heat
Wow.
shield, and I just played it like nothing else to do. Let's make a better kiln.
That's
Had
when
a
I wrote
prototype
Regenerative Soil.
made, and had all the kids come and help me, make biochar with all the neighbors with the prototype kiln. And I'm like, okay, this is a winner. This works.
I love that. I love involving kids too because
Yeah.
fire is something so ancient and it gets such a for a lot of kids, they're attracted to it and it's healthy. It's part of who we are. We all sat around the fire telling stories,
Hmm.
most of the time we've been here, right? And so it's I think it's a birthright to be around fire, to know how to properly be responsible with fire, and and that's so awesome. It's so awesome. That's why I always included my boys because I
Yeah.
knew it's like this is a constructive way to work with
Yes,
fire.
it is. Yeah.
Touches that deep modality. So I've always done conservation burns. I'm excited about the kiln. What is something that people get wrong about biochar? What's something that people just for some reason they get wrong.
About making it or using it?
Either.
Well, about making it, for instance, in the kiln, people think I get all these calls. I've got a ton of wood chips. I want your kiln so I can make biochar with my wood chips. And I have to say, sorry, won't work
Yeah.
because wood chips pack down really tight and cut off all the air. So this only really works with branches and twigs and things that don't pack down. So, yeah, a lot of people just really don't understand fire that well. They don't understand, for instance, that when you burn wood, wood burns in stages. And the first stage is losing the water. So the first stage of smoke you see is a lot of it's steam, and it's this white smoke. And then that smoke will change color and get darker. And that's when the volatiles are coming out. So the hydrogen containing compounds, mainly oxygen, carbon monoxide, and that makes a flame. So a flame is just burning smoke, right? So if you have the heat there, you can burn the smoke and it's clean, relatively clean. And then, so that's the second stage of combustion. And then eventually the flame dies down. So if you've got your backyard fire pit or your campfire ring at a campground, you'll see the flame dies down and then you get that red glowing coals, and the kind of you can see the carbon monoxide and the hydrogen kind of just dancing around, making this little blue glow around the coals. And that's when the stories get really intense. And then it starts to ash. So it's like the char burns in a completely different way than the wood with the hydrogen containing compounds. It glows, right? And it's really hot, and that's where you do your cooking, your grilling. But that's your opportunity to save the biochar. That's how we can make biochar in a flame cap kiln, because when we get to that stage, we just put it out with water, and then we have these beautiful little chunks of charcoal. So that's sort of some basic stuff about fire that I think a lot of people don't get. And then as far as biochar, I think what a lot of people don't understand really is that the best way to use it is in compost and manure management, and that you don't just it's not just something you buy as a fertilizer, because it's not a fertilizer. It's a soil amendment or conditioner, but it's more than that too. It's a catalyst. Um and so and you don't want to just buy it and put it in the ground, or just think of it, as something you just buy as an input for the soil. You want to think of it as something that you can use in a cascade of values, very much a permaculture kind of concept here of stacking functions. And so the highest and best use of biochar is to use it to manage other organic waste streams that are just bleeding nutrients, leaching it into the water or volatilizing as ammonia. We want to use it that way first in a complete system, to reduce our inputs overall by capturing the nutrients we're losing right now by the really horribly awful way we manage organic waste streams.
Absolutely. Have you thought about though actually doing a pyrolysis, a trap pyrolysis system like the Biochar Buddy, where they could do loose material like wood chips, and essentially baking them. So like double duty. Like, have you thought about creating like a ring of fire that allows you to do all the sticks and all the wood, but then also add a layer above it or a layer in it that or a center, closed in area that allows for that pyrolysis.
I've done that to a small extent. So I guess
Ha,
there's
that's awesome.
three main, well, there's several different ways of doing pyrolysis, many different ways, but a few main ways. There's the flame carbonization with the flame cap kilns that we're talking about, which is really a form of gasification. So if you use a T-Lud, you can
Mhm.
gasify wood chips and make char that way, but it's hard to do large volumes. You can do it in a small stove,
Do you
but we
find that it comes out super consistent though? I think with the pellets, I've got two. So the pellets, it seems to like work pretty well, but then you also get like it's a little inconsistent, or at least mine is.
It really depends on the device, if you've got an
Yeah.
active fan blowing or not. Um, and so there are gasifiers, and then there are retorts.
Hmm.
So retorts are, you put the stuff in a closed vessel and you heat it from the outside. And there are batch retorts, which I do this all the time to make bone char. I take a paint can and I put chicken bones in it and I put it in the kiln. And after a while, you see little flames coming out. I put holes in the lid of gas, and then when you open up, you've got bone char.
Wow.
Or I'll put pine cones or flowers or seed pods and things in there just to make cool little charcoal art projects.
So like lime creek paint. I'm just like paint.
I get a clean paint can
Yeah,
from
yeah.
a hardware store, but
Oh,
you
they
could
sell
any container
empty.
like that.
Okay.
So that's a retort. But the problem with a retort is you have to transfer heat from the outside of the container all the way to the middle, right?
Yeah, it's gotta be
So
intense.
that limits the size of it. So there are some mobile retorts you see around, and they don't have a big capacity. They have about a cubic meter capacity for the feedstock, and then what you get out of that is about half.
Yeah.
And it takes a long time to cook it. And I've tried that with a 55-gallon drum, and it's just not efficient use of my time, honestly, when
It
I can
does feel
use
like
more.
we're doing it backwards. We shouldn't be chipping it. We should be making it into biochar and then
Well, but
breaking
that depends. Then on
it.
the other hand, I think you have really small scale like a cook stove,
Mhm.
great. Then you've got like a kind of farm scale like the Ring of Fire kiln, small farm forestry. And then you've got big plants like the Biomass One power plant that Oregon Biochar Solutions uses. And they're pumping through, they're making 10,000 cubic yards a year of biochar. They're pumping through who knows how much biomass. Because when you have biomass like that, so these are continuous feed. So when you have small stuff like chopped up straw or nut shells or any of these things, it really only makes sense to do a continuous feed. And then you've got a biomass handling problem. So handling biomass is tricky and expensive. So you've got to grind it up. It needs to be uniform size. It has to go through conveyors, augers, different feed systems that could bridge, that can jam.
Yeah.
It's big industrial equipment. So you either can have a $2,000 piece of equipment like the Ring of Fire, or a $2 million piece of equipment like a
Jesus
continuous
gap.
spiralizer, and
Yeah.
there's places for all of it, but there's not a whole lot in between.
You know what? That's how it feels like in the soil testing world. It's like, oh,
Mm.
you can pay, $100 for a Haney test or ward or whatever, or you can get the $40,000, XRF gun that will tell you the parts per million instantly and all the heavy metals. And it's like, that sounds
Whoa.
awesome. But who has $40,000 for a soil test?
Well, if you're an ag advisor and you're going
Yeah,
around to
that's true.
everybody's different farm, it's a
Yeah.
great investment. If you're have a biomass energy plant and you're providing electricity to the community from their wood waste, then and you
Yeah.
can make biochar on the side. It works out.
Yeah.
I did do
Bruker
a
is the company if you
project
want to get one.
for pardon?
If you want to get one, Bruker is the company.
Bruker. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think so. Not for me, not at this point. Although I love equipment. I'm a nerd like you, Matt. And I really love that microscope you got. Oh my gosh.
It is just incredible. I love this thing.
Look at that beauty.
It,
I
yeah,
will say
those
there are some.
lockdowns, they certainly forced some of us, you and me, and many other people, to really double down on what we wanted to do, and that was the silver lining, I think, on that whole thing.
I was just going to say one more thing. I did a paper on that is a feasibility study for looking at, or technology assessment, really looking at different equipment for making biochar and heat. So there are
Mm.
some middle ground pieces of equipment. There's a company called Biochar Energy Techniques. They're a Mennonite company, and they make a furnace
Huh.
that is used in lumber dry kilns. And they have a version that has a auger that will pull the ash out, and that's like $100,000 machine. So there are
What?
some in between technologies. If you need the heat, it could be worth it.
Hmm.
It could be worth it, because if you're trying to heat a big space with propane and spending 50 grand a year on that, it could be worth it to have a biomass furnace that makes some biochar on the side.
Yeah. Wow. That's incredible. So do you have any warnings for anyone? I know that there's a thread that's going around about people who are doing low temperature biochar where it's incomplete and it's still holding the VOCs. Um, do you have I believe that you do actually have a temperature guide in the handbook, right?
A temperature guide?
Like a minimum temperature that you need to reach.
Um, well, I don't. No, I don't really, because there's no really bad biochar if it's made from clean biomass waste,
Okay.
as long as it's clean. So there's a range of biochar, and
So
according to temperature.
black walnut VOCs would be fine. Like
No,
all like the tannins and
no,
okay.
not black
Okay.
walnut.
Okay.
No. Yeah, it's true. You picked the one example, but yeah, that's a story too. Yeah, I mean, most low temperature biochar can actually be really good because it's got microbe food in it.
Hmm.
But you need to compost it first, because what it does, it's like putting sawdust in soil. You get nitrogen tie up because the microbes go, oh, carbon, let's go. And then they tie up the nitrogen, and it's temporary, right? So that's one problem with low temperature biochar. The other problem with it is if it's from a plant that has allelopathic chemicals like jugalones and black walnut, or probably what's that,
Cedar.
eucalyptus,
Yeah,
you
eucalyptus.
know,
Oh yeah.
that could be a problem. So compost it first.
Yeah.
If you compost it, the microbes will take care of it, and it'll be fine. So yeah, I don't think, people always say when they look at the biochar from the flame cap kiln, we have some partially burned pieces always that we'll take out, and some of them might end up in the compost, and like it's not completely homogeneous. You have different sizes and chunks. And is your soil homogeneous? You know,
Shouldn't be.
shouldn't be. So I have no problem with that, especially if I'm going to compost it first. That'll take care of most of the problems with biochar.
That's excellent. What excellent advice that is.
Mm-hmm.
And so many of us have, in Missouri, like there's entire properties that's like, oh, black walnut. You know what I mean? And it gets in your hands and stains things and but that's what they have. And so giving it enough time, doing that, and I actually think that having a compost, I mean, having a biochar from those substrates will actually help you break down more efficiently the composting those substrates.
It will, I would think so, because the microbes will be present, and you'll keep them going. And yeah,
But
uh,
yeah, it's like biochar is the solution to the problem itself.
yeah, kind of in a homeopathic kind of sense. But um, the thing about the ring of fire kiln and the flame cap methods, and even the burn pile methods, is that's high temperature biochar.
Hmm.
You're not going to you get low temperature biochar when you make it in a retort,
Yeah,
because you got to transfer that heat in there, and sometimes you don't get, it doesn't get hot enough. It
right.
depends. But usually, because you're making it in the flame, and
You can't
the
measure it. It's a black box. Can't see inside.
right, What you mean? Yeah, it's actually hard to measure the temperature formation, um, even in a flame of the actual temperature of formation. The best way to
Hmm.
do that actually is through Raman spectroscopy, where you look at the degree of aromatic carbon in it.
Huh.
That gives you a clue about the temperature formation. But the temperature of a flame temperature of burning wood is almost 2000 degrees centigrade. Okay. That's the temperature of the flame. And the wood is in the flame and the flame surrounding the wood, and the underneath it is where it's turning into char. So it's not that hot. But when I actually had a grad student analyze some of my char from a flame cap kiln, and it came out to be almost the highest temperature char that he looked at in a range of chars.
I
So
believe it.
it's well cooked.
Yeah.
It's well cooked.
It's got to be better than the conservation burns. Have you compared them?
Yeah, I've done a lot of. I have, getting that Raman spectroscopy. I haven't done that on a
Mm.
lot of different chars, but I've tested a lot of different chars from different um, kilns and conservation burns, and they're pretty similar. They're
Mm.
pretty similar. So yeah, there is a higher carbon percentage in the kiln chars, but the ones in the burns are pretty good too. But it's you just have to sort through the stuff in that partially burned stuff you set aside.
It's just probably there's more ash content in the conservation burn.
Yes, there
Yeah.
is. Yeah.
Yeah, because I've been doing the conservation burn for years. It's something that, became standardized in viticulture, not completely standard, but it was becoming standardized in Sonoma County when it was coming up, such that, garden teachers and even
Mhm.
cannabis people were being like, conservation burn, this is amazing. Meanwhile,
Yeah.
like all the
Ray,
people in
Raymond
viticulture have been doing it forever, right?
Raymond Baltar did that, a lot of that work, and Watamach. Yeah, you had Watamach on.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah, he did a lot
absolutely.
of that teaching.
Yeah, it was really cool to be there in that time period and see that spread and that early
Mhm.
initial enthusiasm. What's probably the most important thing that you want people to know about biochar? Like what do you lead with or end with with people?
You can do it.
Hmm.
Everybody can do it. It's an ancient technique. It's not new. People have been doing it around the world for years. It's
Human.
just, yes, and it's so regenerative on many different aspects, not only for agriculture, but for managing waste, for sanitation. I have a Substack now called the Biochar Prepper.
Mm.
And so I'm trying to write there regularly and to
Like
continue
filtering water, like
prepping.
medicinal poisoning, like using biochar. Are you talking about that?
The biochar prepper, so
Yeah.
prepping. Yeah. Yeah, water filtration, sanitation. What would you do if, the power went out in your house
Pee
and you
into
didn't have
bar
clean water, you didn't have a place to poop?
into
Biochar could really
biochar.
help you.
Yes, yes. With
Yeah.
EM. EM's the other part.
Yeah.
Well,
Yes.
so this happened to me. I was in Issaquah outside Seattle on top of a mountain, and we got snowed in, and then it was like an ice storm afterwards, and no one could come up or go down the hill. So
Mm,
and it was one of those wet storms that turned into ice, so it knocked out the power for
hmm
9 days.
Wow.
And it was so cold that the pipes were frozen. So we had no power, no water, and w- we had we had a wood stove. But the wood stove was all messed up and would smoke the house out. So we're like
Oh,
bundled up, like all
wow.
sleeping in one bed. We got the dogs with us, and we're going to the bathroom in a bucket. And I used EM the entire time because we only used one bucket because that's the bucket we had, you know what I mean? And so it's like and we only had enough material, what I mean? And so we would make a deposit and then we would add some material and biochar and then EM, and that was it controlled all the smell, and it composted really, really well, when we capped it later on. But it's these tools like EM1, like biofertilizers, yeast, lactobacillus, and biochar that I've been able to control like problems of all sorts in permaculture. Like oh, your chicken yard stinks like chicken manure, right?
Hmm.
Well, you just throw some biochar down and water some EM in, and the smell's gone, you know? And for me, the biochar became so critical that as soon as it was in, it never left my practice. And
That's
it's
how
such
it
a
is for me. I can't imagine gardening without it. Gardening was so hard before I started using biochar, and EM is essential, just essential. So I have this pathway where I take my food waste from the kitchen, I put it in a bucket with biochar and bokashi and ferment it, and then it goes to the compost. And it's just so easy. So, I just can't imagine doing without biochar and EM.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, they were taken in initially about 10 years ago by like the fake controversies around it. And then more recently, um, I mean, I've always loved biochar. I've always seen it in the historical context. And so biochar is created all the time, like throughout history, all over the world by indigenous peoples of all sorts. European indigenous peoples, just like Australian, just like, Western, American,
My grandpa burned the
right,
cornfield every year.
right. It is normal and human. And this whole idea that, they're causing climate change started cropping up in permaculture. And I was like, you can't do that. You can't do that. You cannot like say that these cultures that have been using biochar and low burning flames, to control the wilderness regeneratively, and they had bigger trees than you do and better soil than you do, you cannot say that you do it better and you know better. And so it was one of those things that like, oh, you just stepped on the like whoo, you know what I mean? Like I just got so angry when people started trying to mischaracterize biochar, mischaracterize all these indigenous cultures that used fire. One of my favorite books is The Largest Estate on, or The Biggest Estate on Earth, which is about how the Australian Aboriginals used fire, and get this, in a checker, like a chessboard checker pattern. So they would burn a square, and then and it would burn right up to where it burned last year.
Hmm.
And then the next year, you'd burn that other square, and it would burn right up to that square. And they had mastered the ability, and everyone had their own responsibility when that. So a person had like this tree in this area, like everyone was responsible over part of the land. And so they literally managed in this off on pattern of burning. And a lot of the areas, everyone's like, oh, yeah, the coasts are the only place in Australia you can live. And it's like, well, yeah, because it's been destroyed. You know, uh, don't get me wrong, since the last ice age, huge parts of Australia have been super, super dry.
Hmm.
But there were wadis and all these things that were developed by the Australian Aboriginals. And this is what inspired permaculture. But anyway, all I'm saying is it's like biochar is a key part of the story of humanity all over, and how they're trying to paint it, man. I know you've been fighting it for years. You said at the beginning, but for me, it was like, ooh, ooh, you're going after people's like culture. That's a really part of their culture.
And people just don't understand fire. It's an
That's
element.
true.
It's
Scary.
an element like water. Earth, air, water, fire, and we need to embrace it. Living
Yeah.
in the fire adapted forests here in the West, we've really had to come to terms with it. And one thing I've learned is that because of fire exclusion, we've created so many problems in the forests. And if you look at the soils, the recent soil horizons are depleted of charcoal. If you dig down deeper, to a couple 150 years ago, tons of charcoal. Up to half the carbon in the soil is charcoal. So, what are we doing to the nutrient cycling in these forests by depriving them of their charcoal?
Yeah.
So, I've been getting involved with the prescribed burn associations that are really, gaining ground here a lot in the West.
The future.
Melding the indigenous traditional ecological knowledge, with the fire practices of today, and It's been wonderful, interacting with indigenous people that are sharing their techniques now and their knowledge and creating a new fire culture here in the West. We did a training here called Ignite in early April. There were 85 people and they were almost all, they were all young people, which is so great, being an older person, doing these environmental things, you notice that it's sometimes it seems like it's all just the older folks, and this prescribed burning is bringing out a lot of the younger energy, which is really good to see.
And I mean, I don't know if you're seeing it with the kids on your end, but there's this desire for like real life again. They
Mm-hmm.
want they want analog. You know, my kids like vinyl. You know what I mean? My son records
Okay.
to tape. You know what I mean? Like we were at Hermanos Gutierrez like 2 weeks ago at the Aztec Theater in San Antonio. Two guys playing guitar, brothers, on stage, two-story like ballroom, like everyone's dead silent.
Oh,
And I'm like, you can't get this anywhere else. You can't get this on the phone or the internet. This is real life. And so I mean, we're gonna see things come back. We're gonna see people doing like, coppices and then taking the willow, because this is the way it was done in Europe back in the day. They'd take those willow branches and then put it together and then they would char them, and then you'd have your art charcoals to do your art with.
oh
And we're
yeah.
gonna we're gonna have, and I've seen a resurgence of ink, because think about this. This is what I realized recently. All the inks were invented way before petrochemicals. So if you go to those original ink companies, they're like, "Oh, well, this is made with lapis lazuli. That's why it's that blue color." And then this is made with this, and you're like, "Wait. This is made with real flowers? This is made with charcoal only? This is made with just my favorite's coffee bean. The brown and coffee bean is unbelievably rich and just goes from light to dark so beautifully." And this desire for real things, for nature to be really vibrant and healthy again, for us to be healthy again. This is the real things of life. And I'm seeing it in the youth. I'm seeing it in all these people that remembered, like, man, I grew up in a time period where no one knew where all the kids were. We're out and back catching frogs, in the seasonal creeks, and
Mm-hmm.
we're just in nature. And we never knew that it could go away. We
Mm-hmm.
never even knew. We never knew we were playing in a dwindling environment that was dwindling at the time. And so we're all hungry for it. And biochar, I believe, is such a powerful key to this.
Well, you could build soil. I always learned that, oh, it takes 1,000 years to build a centimeter of soil or whatever. We're depleting topsoil. Oh my God. But biochar can build soil so quickly. Like my garden beds, they don't shrink very much. Before I used biochar, every year the soil would shrink. Like,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, I've got to go haul tons of manure and try to build up the organic matter again. And I'd make the compost with my garden, with my kitchen waste and the garden weeds, and that's it. I don't have to add more organic matter than that,
That's
other than the
amazing.
biochar. And you can build soil. You can build soil really quickly.
It's like a way to think about it just functionally is it's a stickiness. Because it's energetically like a magnet, it creates this anchor that gives this, and it's both energetic, it's water, it's always everything, right? But it's physical, it's chemical, it's energetic, but it is this, it's really a linchpin. It's
Hmm.
it's like that pin on the spoke that keeps the wheel on, you know?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So man, I just think about it all the time, what we could do. And I also think about like what's coming. Like, do you have so my students, I discovered in a paper and I brought it to the fore, and I don't even have a recipe for it, but everyone asked me for a recipe for this paramagnetic biochar. And in the literature, just tucked away in this one area of this one paper, it's like, well, if you want to have paramagnetic biochar, add iron sulfate. And I was like, whoa, but we don't have any protocol yet. No one knows the
Mhm.
amounts yet, and no one knows how to prove that it's now paramagnetic.
Dr. Stephen Joseph,
Hmm.
Australian soil scientist, one of the first co-author of Biochar for Environmental Management, which is the textbook. It's on the third edition now. He's done some work on this, and he talks about biochar mineral complexes.
Hmm.
And I have some stuff in the Biochar Handbook about it, talking about what he does, and actually what people used to do with their, they would take, they would make their manage their muck piles. They would take manure, they take wood, and they take iron sulfite and mix them together and burn them, and make these like amazing fertilizers.
Whoa.
So probably pretty polluting. But you could also use, you could also add that to the biochar afterwards, or compost with it. And rock dust. I've been using a lot of basalt, rock dust. That's made a big difference in my garden too. So yeah, biochar itself is not going to be paramagnetic, but if you combine it, with some minerals, you get the mineral phases on the surfaces of the biochar. I mean, it gets really complex what happens on those biochar surfaces with the microbes, the nutrients, the minerals. It's just, it's just wild.
So what are some of those mysteries? What are some of those things that
Oh,
you're
some more
working on?
mysteries. Well, I have another one where I had a kiln full of biochar, the older Oregon kiln,
Hmm.
which I just use in my backyard. It has a drain hole, and I made biochar, in the fall, and then it sat out all winter. I didn't get to, empty it, and it was out there in the rain. And I went to empty it in the spring, and there's that little hole in the ground, and I'm emptying the biochar, and there's all these worms in there in the bottom of the, you know, all there is in there is this biochar and rainwater and the metal kiln. And on the bottom of the kiln, there's, I don't know, a couple dozen worms. It's like, what are you guys doing in here? There's no food.
Yeah.
Why? You know?
Well, I think there's a big question, right? I mean, when I talk about, EMFs and Wi-Fi feeding microbes because and like bacteria and fungi because it's large enough, the cell, when we are using UV light or infrared light has effects on the cell. And measuring these things is the part that's difficult. We know that these things happen, but measuring them to show like, wow, laying in the sun for 2 hours caused this change in your body
Maybe it
because
was
you
like a
now,
spa for them. They're like, okay, I'm going to go in here and just get all, whatever, radiated, electrified, and then I'll go out back and
yeah, I wonder how long they would spend in that
I
environment.
don't know.
Because
I
if
don't
they're
know.
getting energy on a cellular level, they may be feeding on energy more than nutrients at that point, and that might be
Huh.
like a different
Like
pathway.
geobacter, like
Yeah.
the the bacteria that just eat electrons.
Right, right. And then there's the magnetospirilla. You
Well,
know what I
maybe
mean?
they're eating those microbes that are feeding on the electrons.
Right,
Oh,
right. That is fascinating. And
yeah.
yeah, I would love to have tested that water with a microscope. Obviously, we'll have a chance to do that. It'll happen again, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Do you have a
Well,
microscope? Have you thought about that?
I do. I have a, but it's not a fancy one. It's like a $400 Omax with a
Mm-hmm.
video camera.
That's
And
good.
Matt, I have spent hours just looking at stuff, like looking in the objectives and just feeling like I'm down in there with them, right? Like watching.
Yeah.
And I loved your recent video of the comparing the composts under the microscope
Mm.
that you did.
Mm.
That was fascinating, how the little um, bacteria are circling around each other, exchanging genes, genetic material.
What was
That was really,
wild was I knew when they were vibrating against each other, they're doing, conjugation, which is what it sounds like. They're just not making babies. But when they're twirling, I was always like, that's cool. They're dancing. But then the whole orbit thing came up. So in marine bacteria, they were observing marine bacteria, and in the process, they realized that they have i- pieces of DNA that are loosely held by viruses in their orbit. And
Oh,
so they're
wow.
using them to like in their orbit to exchange with other microbes. And is it communication? Is it optimizing in response to the environment? Is it defensive? Are they being like, I don't know. But they look like they're dancing. We
Maybe
know
that's
they're
what we're doing when we're dancing. We just don't realize it.
Oh, we definitely are. We definitely are. We're exchanging so much microbiology. I mean, with the whole masking thing, that we went through disproving, we exchange and we're supposed to exchange so much genetic material with each other. But part of the way we could get coherent, I believe, where you sing with a chorus, it could be in church, could be somewhere else, for 2 weeks straight, your hearts begin to beat in unison when you sing together.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
it's also the case that your microbes have been exchanged eh, fully for 2 weeks because you're going, ah, and and everyone gets all those microbes back in, and you've exchanged with everyone in the room. And we were meant to do that. We were
We were.
really meant to do that. And I think that's part of quorum sensing.
Mhm.
I think part of the reason why we're so fascinated with creating habitat like biochar and soil for the microbes is all of our lives started in a microscopic level. The egg and the sperm, they're all
Yep.
microscopic. Everything starts microscopic. And we have a reverence for that because we
Mhm.
also, whether we know it or not, I think people sense it. Why do we look at our blood under the microscope? Well, because we're going to see the future. We're going to see something that could turn something terrible,
Mhm.
or we see good things, right? And it's the same thing with the soil. One of the things that was cool, but also, you know, a disappointment was that biochar underneath the microscope is like glass, like black obsidian glass. And so it's like midnight. And you can reflect from above, and that's why I do manual lighting, right? But the silhouette light from below, it's a void. So you
Yeah, it's
can't
good
see all
to know
those
there.
cool little like layers and levels. You can't see anything like that.
You kind of need an electron microscope to really look at it.
And
Yeah.
then I need a room, an entire room where no one's moving quickly, no one's walking. Stop walking now. We're gonna take the pictures, and like everything has to be super still, no disturbances for electron, and then you need all the money for that. So
Mm.
I wish I could have cool pictures like we see in your book. Your book is
Well,
amazing.
you could do this kind of picture. Do you ever try to play around with these? The
So
chromatograms?
that's where you use that paper as a filter.
Uh-huh. And you soak it in a silver nitrate solution, so it's like a photographic plate.
Whoa.
And then you do an alkali extraction of the basically the humus in your soil sample,
Huh.
and then you wick it out onto the paper in the different, depending on the weight of the materials, they drop out at different levels.
Hmm.
And you can it gives you a picture of your soil. It's not quantitative, it's qualitative, but it's kind of fascinating. And I
That's super
definitely see
cool.
differences between samples that have biochar and that don't.
That
So,
is super cool.
and it's something anybody can do,
Yeah.
with about $100 worth of materials. So,
I might try that out with my son. My younger boy is like all into photography, like analog life, like I talked about. He has
mm-hmm.
a 1994 or 92 Nikon, the F4, and it's the first fully automated autofocus, but it's machine based. So it's such a wild machine. And he
Wow.
loves it. Gets such incredible pictures. I
Cool.
think so many of us are headed back to the hands-on life.
Yeah.
And I think a big part of it is making things easier so that people can come back in and not feel like they're gonna have to reinvent the wheel to do it. And the biochar kiln, the Ring of Fire, is such an elegant, incredible way to bring people back because it's instantly like so much biochar. It's something that you can do with the whole neighborhood. The whole
Yep.
neighborhood's waste could come to your house, and then everyone can come and take a bucket of biochar back to their gardens and see an incredible effect. This could be something that your community center uses, or your church, or your temple or synagogue. It doesn't matter. Whatever is your community gathering spot, this could be something that they could acquire, they could use, and then could go viral because of the incredible benefits. So thank you for inventing something so powerful, so efficient, and so simple at the same time. Because when people do that, it really A, shows people what's possible in the world. And then B, it just opens the door for more great things. So thank you for doing it.
You're welcome. Thanks for doing what you do, Matt. And I hope we could talk some more because I didn't get to ask hardly any of my questions.
What are your questions? Let's go.
Okay, so I have another mystery. It's not really a biochar mystery, but I've been trying to make fermented plant juices.
Hmm.
And I put a little biochar in the drum, but last summer, somebody left the top of one of the drums open for a while, and I didn't notice it for a while. When I did finally see it, I saw there was a possum in it that had died, crawled
Oh,
in and drowned. I'm like, oh, well, I don't want to deal with this now. So I put the lid on. It's like I'll deal with it when I make the fall compost pile, and compost this poor little possum. So then, a couple months later, like not that long, maybe 2 months later, I go to make the fall compost pile, and like, okay, I got to deal with this possum in here now. And I look in the drum, and I don't see the possum. Oh, it must have sunk to the bottom. And dipping out the material, the liquid, and putting it in the compost, and like, where's the possum? Where's the possum? I empty the whole drum. No possum, not even any bones.
dang.
I'm like, what the heck? And I always make my fermented plant juice just real simply because I don't really know what I'm doing. I throw a little biochar in, then I put in the weeds and, different plants. And then I throw in some EM1 just for the heck of it, and then fill it with water.
Yeah.
So did that culture really digest every bit of that possum, including the bones?
Yeah. And so the LAB is going to take all the proteins into amino acids. And because
Wow.
the LAB is fed by those foods, and then the purple non-silver bacteria in there, which can feed four ways. So it's like the referee in keeping everyone, you know what I mean? Like anything that falls out of the bounds of the lab and the yeast, it can pick it up.
Wow.
Yeah, that's
I was
amazing.
impressed. Now I got to make fermented possum juice.
It might be your best year.
It might be. The compost came out nice.
Ah, that's amazing. That is amazing.
But
But
yeah, I
it
gotta
is.
say, that is one of the things that's to me the best thing about biochar is it makes composting so easy. I don't
Hmm.
turn my compost. I just layer it with biochar, rock dust and garden weeds and the fermented food waste with bokashi, and I just let it sit for 6 months and then I harvest it.
My Johnson stew that everyone saw that video of where I don't have plastic wrapping it tightly. I have like a loose weave like shade over it. And they're like, what are you doing? And it's like, well, if you saw the amount of microplastics I see in compost every day, you probably wouldn't be pressing plastic up against it. But it formed a biocrust because I don't I'm not sealing it, you know what I mean? The wind it's right there. And so I pull off this biocrust form here anywhere naturally because it's arid. It's like black, the richest, best compost I've ever had. And
Mm-hmm.
there is a bunch of biochar that I layered in there. And I did the same thing. I'm putting the green layer, the brown layer, the manure, old compost, to seed it. EM, because the thing is, if you try to soak EM from the top, you got to do it while you do it. And then and then biochar, you know, and that biochar is going to hold that EM in there and allow it to do its work more efficiently. And it came out, I think it's the best compost I've ever had by far. Yeah.
So I sent some of my biochar compost for testing with Ward Labs,
Hmm.
and I compared it to what I saw from some Johnson Sue reports. Mine was as good or better.
Hmm.
So I don't know. I want to send you some of it so you
Please.
can look at it under the microscope. Would
I
you
would
do
love that. Yes.
that? Okay, you're gonna get some in the mail.
Okay.
All right, and Matt, I hope you enjoy your kiln, and let me know if you have questions, and take some pictures and share how it goes for you.
I will advertise it loud and proud when I do use it.
Thank
I've
you.
got to have the whole I got to have the boys with me to help me do it all. And
Yes.
doing a burn by yourself, I would say is never a good idea.
No. Although people
You want a
do.
little bit of a team.
All right.
So where can we learn more from you? Because I know it's not just a book. Most people don't realize this, but you have a full course. Can you tell us about that?
I do. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, it's on regenerative living online, and it's available. We did a live version, and now there's a recorded version that you can get, and it's 9 sessions. It's loosely based on the Biochar Handbook, covering most of the stuff that's covered in the Biochar Handbook, plus a lot more because I'm always learning more, so I had to add more stuff. And it's like an hour and a half lecture, and followed by a half hour of questions from the students who were there, and a lot of extra materials. And yeah, so 9 weeks, so 9 sessions. It was quite the info dump.
Ah,
So if you really want to know everything that I know about biochar anyway, you can get that course, Regenerative Living Online. And then my website is wilsonbiochar.com, just Wilson Biochar. And they'll give you the link to buy the kiln. It'll give you the link to the course. It'll give you a link to the Biochar Handbook, which you can buy all the normal online booksellers. You can get it anywhere. So
and you could subscribe there to your mailing list to get information for
yeah,
because you do
yeah.
speaking tours and you do demos, right?
I do a lot. In fact, I'm going to be in Kentucky next week. And so, yeah,
Awesome. Well, when you are in Austin, please let me know.
I will. I'm going to have to make a point of that.
Well, the music's good down here, so we'll have a lot of fun.
All right. That sounds
All
great,
right.
Matt.
Thank you so much, Kelpie.
Thank you. It was fun.
Absolutely. We'll do it again.
Okay. Take care.
You too.
Hello there, friends. My name is Kelpie Wilson. I'm the author of the Biochar Handbook, and this is my comprehensive knowledge dump of everything I've learned about biochar since 2007. That's how long I've been learning about biochar, working with biochar researchers around the world, and applying biochar in my own garden and my own systems for recycling waste and composting, and working with others as well, and just teaching and learning. I am all about helping you learn to make and use your own biochar for any use that you might have in your home, farm, or garden. And I want to make it easy for you. So I have the book, the Biochar Handbook. You can find this online anywhere. It's published by Chelsea Green, a major publisher of wonderful garden and farming books. And I also make the biochar kiln, the Ring of Fire biochar kiln. I manufacture and sell those. And you can find those on my website, wilsonbiochar.com. And I am also offering now a complete course called Practical Biochar. It's through Regenerative Living Online. It's a 9-session course that I taught this last winter, and it's now available for self-paced use. So please check that out as well. So it's a whole package that will allow you to make and use biochar for your own purposes and to learn all about this amazing approach to regenerative farming and gardening and building soil. And so, yeah, I invite you to go check out wilsonbiochar.com. And my kitty, this is Barney. We would love to have you join us in learning about biochar. I'm sitting here in my biochar garden, so I'm going to stop now and take you on a little quick tour around the garden. And just give you a peek at the soil here underneath this cover crop. This is what soil with biochar looks like. Incredibly dark, rich, full of little chunks of char, full of life, microbial life, soil life of all kinds. I've got a fig tree, I've got asparagus and a few artichokes. And I've got all these beds that are now prepared and ready for planting. They've got the biochar compost on them, and they've got a straw mulch, and I'm just ready, waiting for the weather to clear up a little bit and get a little warmer so I can pop in the tomatoes and the peppers. These are dahlias. And my potatoes are coming up. And that's where all the tomatoes are going to go. We'll usually grow about 40 tomato plants because we make tons of sauce. And yeah, this is my biochar garden. And with the resources that I can provide you between the Ring of Fire kiln for making your own char and the book, the Biochar Handbook, and the Practical Biochar course, you can learn everything I know about biochar. This is one of my biochar compost piles. I layer in the garden weeds and my food scraps and biochar and rock dust. Here's some biochar right here. And it makes amazing compost, and it's super easy. This is my favorite thing to do with biochar, is compost it, because I don't need to turn the compost. I just make piles and I let them sit for 6 months, and I have the most beautiful compost at the end. So anyway, this is my garden in Southwest Oregon, and I would love to be able to share all these biochar resources with you. So please head on over to wilsonbiochar.com and check out what I have to offer. All right, thanks.